Hello, welcome to today's edition of the Academy. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about man's friend and foe alike. Sun Tzu spends chapter 12 talking a lot about fire and its use in warfare, as well as a few other topics. We're going to focus on the first few sentences that deal with the fire and using fire in war. Alright, so, you know, a lot of games don't include mechanics for fire. However, some do. Matter of fact, I know in my past I've played at least 4 games I can think of, 4 different game systems that had some mechanic in it that dealt with fire. Whether it was a weapon you had. Now, I'm not talking flamethrowers here, okay? But to having a weapon that would actually cause something to catch fire, or have mechanics for naturally occurring fires, whether it's or unnaturally occurring fires, and what it would mean. So this particular chapter may not apply to most game systems. However, keep an eye out for 2 things. One is games that actually do include a mechanic for fire, and 2, the possibility of maybe writing scenarios that feature fire as a feature. Don't want to use that same word, but as a component of the scenario itself, where fire could be used by either side to affect the outcome of the battle, or maybe simply the presence of the fire limits or affects how different units can do different things. Okay, so let's just go through his first few sentences. Now, this is only 13 sentences in the chapter. The chapter is much longer than that, but this is the only stuff that really applies to fire and that really only translates into the actual game. So, Sun Tzu said, "There are 5 ways of attacking with fire. The first is to burn soldiers in their camp. The second is to burn stores. The third is to burn baggage trains. The fourth is to burn arsenals and magazines. And the fifth is to hurl dropping fire amongst the enemy. In order to carry out an attack, we must have means available. The material for raising fire should always be kept in readiness. There is a proper season for making attacks with fire, and special days for starting a conflagration. The proper season is when the weather is very dry. The special days are those when the moon is in the constellations of the sieve, the wall, the wing, or the crossbar. For these 4 are all days of rising wind. In attacking with fire, one should be prepared to meet 5 possible developments. 1. When fire breaks out inside the enemy's camp, respond at once with an attack from without. Number 2. If there is an outbreak of fire, but the enemy's soldiers remain quiet, bide your time and do not attack. When the force of the flames has reached its height, follow it up with an attack, if that is practicable. If not, stay where you are. 4. If it is possible to make an assault with fire from without, do not wait for it to break out within, but deliver your attack at a favorable moment. And 5. When you start a fire, be to the windward of it. Do not attack from the leeward. A wind that rises in the daytime lasts long, but a night breeze soon falls. In every army, the 5 developments connected with fire must be known, the movements of the stars calculated, and a watch kept for the proper days. Hence, those who use fire as an aid to their attack show intelligence, and those who use water as an aid to the attack gain an ascension of strength." Now, it's really interesting. Oh, don't mind the crutches, little injury. Essentially, think back in Sun Tzu's time, there weren't a lot of opportunities to make fire and to use it often in the camp of the enemy, to attack the enemy with it. But there were definitely opportunities for it to occur. Now, you not only had the ability to bring fire into the enemy's camp to attack them with fire, usually during a siege or something like that, but there was also the opportunity that it would come up with by naturally occurring fire. I don't know how many of you have ever been in a situation where you had started a fire and it kind of got a little bit out of control. Hopefully nothing serious, but you saw how, with just the least, at least a little bit of spark or something, it could go where you didn't want, especially if the wind was in the wrong direction. So Sun Tzu's trying to tell us that there's a lot of opportunity available to us if we want to use fire, and he gives some suggestions on how to deal with it. So let's just kind of talk through. There's 5 different ways of using the fire, right? And the first is to burn the soldiers in their camp, which is essentially bringing fire. You burn their tents down. Tent is a flammable good, and it will go up, and that becomes a furnace. You will injure, if not actually outright kill, soldiers. In fact, if you catch them when they're asleep, then smoke inhalation occurs. Well, there's a whole bunch of goodness that comes out of that from your perspective, right? The second is to attack the stores, and that's supplies in general, not necessarily. That's like food, okay? Because you want to starve them out, right? You're going to attack their flour supply, their wheat, their grain. That's all going to burn, and flour is explosive in a dust form. So there's a lot of potential there. Now, third is burning the baggage train, which is essentially just supplies, everything from additional implements for the manufacture or repair of the things in your army. That's the biggest thing, the baggage train. There's a lot of personal goods too. So you take out the baggage train, you're going to do some morale damage as well as logistical damage. And then he talks about burning the arsenals and magazines. Now, of course, in the modern times, you have a lot more flammable, explosive things that can be affected by fire, so that's even more reason to do it now. And finally, fifth is actually dropping fire amongst the enemy. Now, this is when they're arrayed in the field of battle. It may have happened during war, but if it does, it's really a morale shaker. It's not really going to be much of an attack because it depends on how you launch the attack. If you launch a catapult that has some flaming oil in it, for example, that will splash and ignite oil somewhere. Potentially. There's always the possibility that it'll just snuff itself out. Because, remember, in order for something to burn, the liquid has to actually become a gas of some sort in order for it to burn. It actually burns the gas. So you can throw a vegetable oil, which is usually what they use in those times, vegetable oil, even melted fat. As soon as if you light a rag and you throw that, if that fat just or oil just covers the burning rag, it just put the fire out. So it has to land just right to ensure that it actually explodes. So it's kind of chancy to go in against the enemy. But there's ways to design siege weaponry to make that possible. The assault on the city of, it escapes me, it's assault and Sidon. There was a island fortress off of the Tyre, Tyre, off this coast, and essentially Alexander built a rampart just by throwing rocks into the causeway until it reached there. Well, not only was he able to assault from the wall, he was also able to design ships that could bring fire in against the tower walls by causing these contraptions, I'll call them, where they have lit oil cascading down in front of the ship onto the wall and such. So there's a lot of things they could do, but that takes a lot of time and preparation. Not usually going to happen in your war game, but there are times when you can. Think of all the things you have as a flamethrower. In wooden ships combat, Age of Sail type things, you'll have heated shot that could light stores of gunpowder and start rigging on fire, stuff like that. There are opportunities. So we're going to look at how to kind of work these into your game. And the key points aren't in actually the sentences themselves, but in what those sentences ignite, sorry, no pun intended, in your imagination. So in number 2, this one applies directly. In order to carry out the attack, we must have the means available. The material for raising the fire should always be kept in readiness. Well, if you're going to light a fire, you need to have stuff for it. So you need to make sure you have your flamethrowers. Make sure you had, for example, white phosphorus mortar rounds. Have your heated shot available. Heated shot. Anything, if you Greek fire, whatever it is that you've got that allows you to ignite stuff. You want to make sure that's in your army. Otherwise, what's the point of even thinking about fire, right? The next piece is essentially all about season. Now, a lot of games don't care about this particular part. However, certain game systems incorporate, if they do put fire in, they do incorporate a weather component. And oftentimes, they'll have grain farmers' fields and whatever. During a fall scenario, they will be more flammable than earlier in the year. As a matter of fact, there are several times during the year when it's more dangerous to light a fire. That's what Sun Tzu kind of cautions against, or actually helps you understand in this passage. Matter of fact, now, as I'm recording this, is not a very good time. My intent for this particular video was to actually have in my backyard. I've got a prairie, and every few years I do burn it to kind of just take care of it. It's part of the things you do with a prairie. And I was going to actually launch a flaming arrow into the grass, and then just there goes the fire, just to kind of illustrate the point of the use of fire, to kind of set it up. I thought it would be kind of spectacular and all. Well, bad time of year, grass is too green. Even if there's wind, there's not a flammable material available at the moment. So there goes that. Even the fire you just saw was just, I didn't want to get too much. It took a little bit of time to light. I didn't want to have the actual fuel going while we're filming this. Don't want to be distracted by having to watch a fire while videotape this. But the conditions, it had just rained here recently, so they're not very favorable to launching fire, right? So when you do have a system that incorporates these things, you're going to want to pay attention to that aspect, either designing the scenario or playing it. Always, this is a situation where if the rule may be present in the scenario, but you have to actually grab onto it and say, oh, ooh, fire, I can do something with this, and already have some ideas in your mind. Okay, so be aware. Some in the cases, some scenarios will have the opportunity, just like some seasons are a better opportunity than others. You want to be there ready to seize it. So be aware of when it's in the rules. Make sure it's in the components to create fire or in your army. And then there's one other piece that he talks about that is kind of interesting. He advises, of course, on land, to be to the windward, which means upwind, of the opponent when you're launching a fire attack, not the leeward or downwind, right? Now that is usually the case. However, on the battlefield on land, that's a lot easier to pull off. You can position yourself well depending on the way the wind shifts. But on the ocean, it's a little bit harder. So you're going to have to be careful. Sometimes you'll be able to engage an opponent with elements that will cause fire, whether it be the lighting of an actual fire ship, or the inclusion of a heated shot in an arsenal, or maybe you've got flaming catapults or ammunition or whatever, or you actually have Greek fire in your navy ships that you're using. You don't want to wait until you're upwind of your opponent to do that, okay? Because again, you're maneuverable, and the opponent can steer potentially. So, but if you're going to do it downwind from the opponent, you just need to make sure that you are in a position where you can get out of the way. Because if it's going to be difficult for you to get out of the way, what will the opponent want to do? If the rule system allows them to take action, they could ram you to try to entangle their ship with yours, basically making the fire your problem as well as their problem. So it's a caution that's good, but on the sea, you may not want to restrict yourself too much. Just pay attention to the direction of the wind, especially if you're navigating via sails instead of oar power, because with oars you will be able to maneuver out of the way a lot more easily than you will if your opponent and you have sails, right? So keep that in mind. So that really is the subject as a whole. Now, I think that opens up some things here. I want to kind of add a few footnotes to the end of this. I know this is a little bit longer video, but I think there's a lot of meat in this particular one, and I think it bears a little bit of additional comment. And that is when you actually get around to well, why are you going to light fires? Aside from the fact that you can actually do damage to ships and to, well, troops, you could do damage to troops, you really are looking more at using it to obstruct the opponent or force him in some way. Now, for example, if your opponent is in a particular position, you light fire to that position, he's not going to stick around, right? He's going to move. If you have a field that's on fire that's a pretty easy access that infantry can just walk right through, you light that field, he's not going to walk through, okay? So that's a potential there. There's always the potential of the smoke itself interfering with visibility, and that is a key piece of fire. And there's always the potential of the smoke itself hampering visibility, and that's always a key when you're playing with fire. Boy, that's an interesting way to put it. Think about where would you want to block line of sight. You may not have an opponent in a particular position, and you want to light that position on fire because the smoke from that location will mask your movement in some way. Perfectly legitimate use of fire, right? But again, the system has to acknowledge that and include the mechanic for that, or the scenario has to be designed to accommodate it. Okay, so there's some things you can think about. Again, the reason to use it is to burn an enemy out of position. You're not going to necessarily kill him or hurt him, but you're keeping him away from something. You're going to keep him from going through an area. You're going to block line of sight, right? And that's just tactically on the battlefield. Now, we're going to talk about things such as damaging supplies and area denial in future videos, so I'm not going to cover those things right now, but I think that's kind of a good summary for what Sun Tzu's talking about when he's dealing with using fire. The actual title is The Attack by Fire, Chapter 12. Okay, so thanks for sticking around with this video. We'll catch you in the next Academy. Please share, like, subscribe, and click that bell when you want to hear the next one's been released. All right, thank you very much. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.